This is a book by Anne Cameron, and it's the stories that Jullian tells. I hope you enjoy it. Again, this is one of my favorite books, and I think by this time you've learned I have a lot of favorite books. Chapter 1. The Pudding Like the Night on the Sea. I'm going to make something special for your mother, my father said. My mother was out shopping. My father was in the kitchen, looking at the pots and the pans and the jars of this and that. What are you going to make? I asked. A pudding, my father said. My father is a big man with wild black hair. When he laughs, the sun laughs in the window panes. And when he thinks, you can almost see his thoughts sitting there on the table and the chairs. When he's angry, me and my little brother Huey shiver to the bottom of our shoes. What kind of pudding will you make? Huey said. A wonderful pudding, my father said. It will taste like a whole raft of lemons and a night on the sea. Then he took down a knife and sliced 5 lemons in half. He squeezed the first one and juice squirted in my eye. Stand back, he said, and he squeezed again. The seeds flew out onto the floor. Pick those seeds up, Huey, he said. Huey took the broom and swept them up. My father cracked some eggs and put the yolks in a pan and the whites in a bowl. He rolled up his sleeves and pushed his hair back to beat the yolks. Sugar, Jullian, he said, and I poured in the sugar. He went on beating. Then he put in the lemon juice and the cream and set the pot on the stove. The pudding bubbled, and he stirred it fast. Cream splashed on the stove. Wipe that up, Huey, he said. Huey did. It was hot by the stove, and my father loosened his collar and pushed up his sleeve. The stuff in the pan was getting thicker and thicker. He held the batter high in the air. Just right, he said, and sniffed the smell of the pudding. He whipped the egg whites and mixed them into the pudding. The pudding looked softer and lighter than air. Done, he said, and he washed all the pots and splashed water on the floor and wiped the counter so fast his hair made circles around his head. Perfect, he said. Now, I'm going to take a nap. If anything important happens, bother me. But if nothing important happens, don't bother me. And the pudding is for your mother. Leave the pudding alone. He went into the living room and was asleep in a minute, sitting straight up in a chair. Huey and I guarded the pudding. Oh, it's wonderful pudding, Huey said, with waves on top of it like the ocean, I said. I wonder how it tastes. Leave the pudding alone. If I just put my finger in there, I'll know how it tastes. And he did it. You did it. How does it taste? It tastes like a whole raft of lemons and a night on the sea. "Oh, you made a hole in the pudding," I said. "But since you did it, I'll have a taste." It tasted like a whole raft of lemons and a night on the sea. "It's such a big pudding," Huey said. "It can't hurt to have a little bit more." "That's a bigger lick than I got. I'm going to have more." "Whoops," I said. "You put in your whole hand," Huey said. "Look at the pudding. You spilled some on the floor." "I'm going to clean it up." And I took a rag from the sink. "That's really not clean," Huey said. "It's the best I can do," I said. "Look at the pudding," Huey said. It looked like it had craters on the moon. "We have to smooth that over," I said, "so it looks the way it did before. Let's get a spoon." And we evened the top of the pudding with spoons. And while we evened it out, we ate some more. There's not much left. We were supposed to leave the pudding alone. "We better get away from here," I said. We ran into the bedroom and crawled under the bed. And after a long time, we heard my father's voice. "Come into the kitchen, dear. I have something for you." "Why, what is it?" my mother said out in the kitchen. Under the bed, Huey and I pressed ourselves up against the wall. "Look," my father said in the kitchen, "a wonderful pudding." "Where's the pudding?" my mother said. "Where are you boys?" my father said. His voice went through every crack and corner of the house. We felt like two leaves in a storm. "Where are you?" I said. My father's voice was booming. Huey whispered to me, "I'm scared." We heard my father slowly walking through the rooms. We could see his feet. He was coming into our room. He lifted the bedspread. There was his face and his eyes like black lightning. He grabbed us by the legs and pulled. "Stand up," he said. We stood up. "What do you have to tell me?" he said. "We went outside," said Huey, "and when we came back, the pudding was all gone." "Then why are you hiding under the bed?" my father said. We didn't say anything. We looked at the floor. "I can tell you one thing," he said. "There's going to be some beating here now. There's going to be some whipping." The curtains in the window were shaking. Huey was holding my hand. "Go into the kitchen," my father said, "right now." We went into the kitchen. "Come here, Huey," my father said. Huey walked toward him, his hands behind him. "See these eggs?" my father said. He cracked them and put the yolks in the pan and set the pan on the counter. He stood a chair by the counter. "Stand up here," he said to Huey. Huey stood on the chair by the counter. "Now it's time for your beating," my father said. Huey started to cry, and his tears fell into the egg yolks. "Take this," my father said. and my father handed him an egg beater. "Now beat those eggs," he said. "I want this to be a good beating." "Oh, oh," said Huey, and he stopped crying and he beat those egg yolks. "Now, you, Jullian, stand here," my father said. I stood on a chair by the table. "I hope you're ready for your whipping." I didn't answer. I was too afraid to say yes or no. "Here," he said, and he set the egg yolks in front of me. "I want these whipped, and whipped well." "Yes, sir," and I started to whip. My father watched us, and my mother came into the kitchen and watched us. After a while, Huey said, "This is hard work." "Too bad," my father said. "Your beating's not done." And he added sugar and cream and lemon juice to Huey's pan and put the pan on the stove. And Huey went on beating. "My arm hurts from whipping," I whined. "That's too bad," said my father. "Your whipping's not done." So I whipped, and Huey beat and beat. "Hold the batter in the air, Huey," my father said. Huey held it in the air. "See," my father said, "a good pudding stays on the beater. It's thick enough now. Your beating is done." Then he turned to me. "Let's see those egg whites, Jullian." They were all puffed up and fluffy. "Congratulations, Jullian. Your whipping's done." He mixed the egg whites into the pudding himself, and then he passed the pudding to my mother. "A wonderful pudding," she said. "Would you like some, boys?" "No, thank you," we said. She picked up a spoon and tasted. Mmm. It tastes like a whole raft of lemons," she said. "It's like a night on the sea."